Welcome to our monthly roundtable on neuroplasticity and leadership, unpacking my Crave Leadership Model. We are going to discuss the power of vulnerability in leadership through the lens of neuroscience. I am your host, Dr. Amin Saaya, Master Neuroplastician, and I'm joined today by a mighty force. To my right is Tanner. You can go ahead, and then Denise, and then Dr. JJ.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tanner Thorp. I'm human being, thought leader, change agent, and super excited to be here. I love the Crave model, and what we're talking about today, I think, is very, very important.
Denise, you're
Okay,
next.
I think I'm next.
Yep.
I'm Denise Cooper, same as Tanner. I'm a thought leader. I'm out here trying to figure out how we're going to create a better place and work with mission-driven companies that are interested in doing good in the world.
Awesome. Dr. JJ.
Hi, everybody. I'm JJ. I'm a follower of thought leaders, so I think I'm in the right place today. I'm really happy to see you, Denise, Tanner, but sorry, I'm on my phone and the camera just crashed ages ago, and I haven't bothered getting it raw. But I mean, I'm really interested. I'm really excited. There's a good chance I'll have to leave early, but let's hope that that's fate's on my side. I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. So welcome everyone. Now, before we got on, we're having a really awesome conversation, and we'll go back to it in just a second. To start the segment though, I did want to do a small exercise. So if we can just take 2 minutes and let's close our eyes. Take a few deep breaths to center ourselves. Think back at a recent situation that you had at your workplace or in your personal life that you felt vulnerable. It could be admitting a mistake, sharing a personal challenge, or expressing an unpopular opinion. Picture the scenario in your mind. Recall those emotions. Now, let's go around the room and let's talk about how did you respond to that vulnerability and how did others respond to you being vulnerable? Whoever wants to go first.
I guess I'm giggling and everybody can hear it.
Yeah.
So, I think it is the thing about this work is oftentimes you don't know what to say for somebody, and yet they're looking at you to be the expert and to have what you need to say. And so whenever I get in a situation, two things can cause me to be more vulnerable than I want to be. One is someone says something that is offensive to me, and my brain just disconnects from my mouth, and I say something that probably I could have said better out of it. And then I'm like, oh crap, now I've got to repair the relationship. And so I feel a bit of disappointment as well as explanation. And many times what the best choice is after reflecting on it is you should have just shut up. That would have, just shut up, say it, and then move on from it. The other is that when I really don't know the answer to a really tough question that somebody's asked me about how to deal with something in the workplace, or where they should take the leap, and some people look to you for answers for that. And I often afterwards, or during it, I feel like I should be better. I should know better. I should have been responsive, you know, particularly if the answer comes to me, you know, after the session and I'm like, dang it, why'd you say that? So those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, so a specific example for me recently in vulnerability is I had a leader that was really struggling with me. And I was struggling with the way that they were showing up and some of the ways that they were doing things. And you know, we sat down and had a conversation, and you know, I had some examples of some setbacks and some missteps that this leader had. And he said, Tanner, you don't ever come and talk to me. You don't ever, like, you just you walk through the operation and you'll talk to other people, but you don't talk to me.
Mm.
The only time you come up to me is really when you need something, but there's no real exchange. And so I had to be very self-reflective in that. And, you know, he used another example of another team member that I would gravitate to. And the reality of the situation is that team member was very, we were just talking about it before we started the call or the podcast, is that some people believe that their vulnerability is your responsibility to take care of. Their struggle that they have, their inability to comprehend stressors and situational context, you know, they expect you to figure it out for them. And this particular leader was very needy in that way. So, you know, as I was reflecting on it, he was absolutely right. You know, I would gravitate to this person to make sure that they were getting everything that they needed to, so that we didn't have essentially issues throughout the day. And I was neglecting this other leader. And as we talked through it, you know, I had to be very vulnerable in owning my piece of that, but also in explaining that sometimes you have very strong leaders, and in that you tend to focus on the weaker leaders because you're trying to grow them, and you neglect the strong leaders and the attention that they need also. That, hey, you know, not necessarily do they need attaboys or attagirls, but how are you doing? Are you getting everything that you need? I recognize that you're a very strong performer, and how can I continue to help you and grow you? Because they're the ones that are going to go, honestly, they're the ones that are going to go the furthest, right? Because they want to be a part of it. And it was just a really healthy, cathartic conversation between the two of us. And the relationship over the past 3 weeks since that conversation has really blossomed.
Wow, that was powerful right there. I felt it as you were talking about it. I've had that in the past. I go back to my early days as a leader. As you start learning that you have a responsibility to yourself and others, but also because being a leader doesn't mean that you have to be strong, that you can't show that you're human. So in my early days, I failed so much because that's what I thought a leader was, is, you know, being that strong person, and you had to know it all, and you had to be all, and you couldn't show that you were weak in any area. And one day I was like, you know what, I can't continue this this facade, this I would say this mask I put on every day, coming to work, making it seem like I'm somebody that really I'm not, just because I thought that that was what being a leader was, or what being a leader required you to be. And I just decided to be vulnerable, and spoke to the team from my heart, and just, you know, kind of share my feelings and my frustrations, and the things that I do wrong on a daily basis. And wow, not only did I feel, I would say, free, relieved, but you should have seen the faces on the on my leaders. I mean, they were like, wow, okay. And the relationship just changed from there on. I mean, we just had a better relationship as humans, not in a just a leadership respectful manner in the workplace, but in the sense of, hey, you're human. Oh, you're like us. Okay. Now we can relate to you. So that was very powerful for me, realizing in that sense that there's nothing wrong with putting yourself out there and sharing your thoughts, your feelings with your team, so you can humanize the relationship. All right. So in getting into, so speaking of that, when we think about vulnerability, um, like I mentioned earlier, we people often associate it with feelings of weakness or exposure. However, from a neurological perspective, vulnerability is far more complex, but also fascinating. So, in looking at the neuroscience of vulnerability, as we explore the neurological responses involved when we display vulnerability. First, the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, and insula are activated. This enables emotional processing and empathy, which is a big part of vulnerability, while the prefrontal cortex moderates the amygdala's fear responses. So when the amygdala is triggered, that's when we have those thoughts of fear being that, when you have the amygdala hijack, we have the feeling of threat. So you have the series of emotions going through you. And as we continue this conversation, we're going to look at some of these things through the lens of vulnerability, and also how can we have some say in that and strengthen those neural pathways so that we can regulate those emotions. Our first question that we're going to go through is, what are some tangible benefits of embracing vulnerability as a leader? And how can embracing vulnerability transform leadership and organizational culture?
I think the very first thing that vulnerability does as a leader is it humanizes you. Right? We all have experiences that we bring in to our workplaces that are life experiences. We all have valleys and mountaintop moments that have shaped us and grown us into who we are. And as long as we're learning from those things, I mean, history repeats itself, and you're destined to repeat the same lesson over and over and over again until you learn from it. But once you learn from it, then you can use it as part of your story, and understanding your story can help motivate those around you. Because once your team sees that you are human too, then they can start to relate. Then they start to open up, and you may find that you have shared experiences. You may find that you have team members that have walked through the same valleys or walking through the same valleys at those moments, and you can help them show up as the best that they can be. Which I think is beneficial not only to the individual but also to culture. I think that culture, in my opinion, is the most important piece of any business. If you have a good culture, you can grow from that, right? But it has to be culture from the top down, and the bottom up. The leader has to truly embrace the culture that the business has. And through that vulnerability, you can also expose some areas of the culture that's not working, as long as it is a healthy culture. And that can also help grow that organization.
I guess just a couple of things. One to bounce off of both of you a little bit. Um, I think for me, the value of being vulnerable and getting leaders to be vulnerable is the fact that it calms the amygdala. Because when you're hiding,
Yeah.
It's, prickly.
Yes.
It's just firing and trying to, and it diverts your attention in terms of prefrontal analysis, gets all out of whack because you're not really seeing the real situation. What you're reacting to is the fact that something else is going on, or you don't feel in control, or so there's another story running simultaneously to the event that's happening in front of you. And so when you can shape it and have that conversation and it is received well, what it does is it allows you to bring your critical thinking skills back online. And then you can dive into it in a way that is probably the most powerful for you. So that's one thing I thought about based on what we've talked about. The other is culture is one of these interesting things that we look at it, or we say it, and we think it's, you kind of set it in place, but it is also this thing that constantly pushes up against vulnerability. The better, whether it's a good culture and one people feel open in, or one where you have to be a little bit more professional and watch your words, or one in which it's just a bad culture. No matter what it is, it's always pushing up against vulnerability, and it is always evolving based on how you handle showing up authentically or not out of it. And so I think that we think of vulnerability sometimes only from a perspective of what I give or I'm doing, and how people are receiving, but it's also how you use vulnerability, or the value of it is also in how you think about shaping your culture on a constant basis, because the culture is not a set thing. It is a evolving living organism, and every time you add a person or take a person out, it shifts a little bit. And so how you use it and think about it really shapes the culture into what you want it to be, and more closer to what you want it to be, or to keep it where it's at least elastic, right? And it has a good elasticity in it.
I love that.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. My mind is like.
I think JJ's coming off mute. JJ's got something to say.
Hey, JJ.
I'm just teasing.
Oh,
come on, man.
There is so much to dive in here. I want to go back to my vulnerability, if that's okay.
Yes.
And with I don't know how much you guys seen about this birthday event we're hoping to host in June, around the fact that we're now 1 year old, and it's such a weird experience around vulnerability, because I've approached pretty much all of the big names in applied neuroscience, and everybody has kind of said, yes, we're happy to speak at the event. And it's kind of like a bit weird, like why are you now interested? I've been doing the same thing for so long. And the point around culture is that the culture of the NPN Hub is starting to take place as a place where thought leaders hang out. So it's not like we need to invite the thought leaders. We already are the thought leaders in this environment. So thought leaders who want to remain thought leaders better come hang out with us. So it's a funny experience. So the vulnerability has initially started out with a sense of humility, but when things start going wrong is when your true colors shine, don't they? And
Oh, yeah.
and I've got an idea that I've been playing with. I mean, now that you're speaking into the neuroscience, and I was looking at the action of inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters in relationship to the Q4 model. I don't know if you guys have come across the Q4 model. It's a very useful way of understanding vulnerability. Have you ever seen it?
No.
No, I don't think so, or at least
Okay.
not named as a Q4.
I mean, anyway, it's pretty old, but it speaks about being passive aggressive, assertive, and submissive.
Mm.
Okay.
So you can put it on like a little XY, and you can Google it. I'm sure it's everywhere. But I was thinking about the neurotransmission associated with it, and I came to the idea. And so this idea is about 10 minutes old, and the idea is related to inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmission. And when you are aggressive or hostile, it's clearly an overload of excitatory neurotransmitters, epinephrine, leading into overstimulation of acetylcholine and ending up in cortisol going rampant. And when you're not being effective and you become passive aggressive, the lack of inhibitory transmitters like serotonin are a problem. And I was thinking about when you are vulnerable, it's everything. I mean, so this conversation is like the whole story, because we only become douchebags when things don't go our way. When things are going great, we're all noddy and happy. But the point around this is so important. And then building on what you were saying about culture, it's so it's so impossible to control.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership obviously is the steering instrument, but leadership is a trait rather than a job description. And building a culture of leadership and self-leadership and psychological safety, it is, I mean, it's impossible. I'd love to ask you and Tanner what it's like under the hood in your environment, but we're being recorded, so I might get you guys fired or promoted. I don't know, but but the idea around the role of leadership when you're vulnerable, I don't know what to do, because I've been researching and studying this, and when the chips are down, my dragons come out. And if they're passive aggressive dragons or fire breathing dragons, they're dragons nonetheless. So help me. I mean, I'm here to learn.
It's interesting what you said about the passive aggressive and the serotonin. Did you say there was a lack of serotonin when we have those passive aggressive behaviors, or someone is displaying those behaviors?
It's obviously not as simple as associating neurotransmitters
Yeah.
with four different states. But passive aggression tends to be when I'm out of control and I don't know what to do. And I don't have a sense of well-being, and therefore it can be easily associated with lack of serotonin. If that carries on for long, it'll make me feel depressed, and obviously depression can follow if you never get that sorted out. And we know that if depression kicks in, there is a strong correlation with lack of serotonin.
Yes.
Hence the invention of serotonin re-up inhibitors, the SSRIs.
Yeah.
So, maybe it all starts there, when we don't just share our dragons, but sharing them assertively and vulnerably, if I can say that, is the medicine, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and the reason I was asking is so that I mean we can walk into well, I guess not even walk, but I guess we'll go down this rabbit hole. But with passive aggressive, what I've noticed is in that type of behavior, um, in organizations, when you have individuals that are constantly in that state of mind of passive aggressive, it's because they've been subjected to uh, this environment of uh, they've never been able to be themselves. They've never been able to really truly share who they are. So, in order for them to be able to share some of it, uh, they have to make passive aggressive comments to kind of uh, tiptoe around. Let me dip my toe in the water and see if it's okay. Uh, and that's what I've experienced, and just almost 30 years of being in the leadership positions. So there is something there to what you're saying, uh, and maybe trying some I would say not pharmaceutical intervention, but maybe trying some exercises where these people that show this type of behaviors are giving uh, a podium or a space where they can share who they really are and see if by doing a series of those exercises or those sessions, the passive aggressive episodes become less and less.
Yeah, I think what you're
No,
saying
I'm
is
sorry, Tanner, please carry
no.
on.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is incredibly true and powerful. And I would agree. Those that respond with passive aggressive dragons usually don't feel safe, right?
Correct.
Yeah, they don't feel like, and the ones that have the fire breathing dragons, they don't know how to regulate their emotions, right? Doesn't mean that we don't, have opportunities or reasons to get upset or mad at times, and it manifests itself in certain ways. Sometimes those fire breathing dragons are justified, but the passive aggressive dragon is one that the person has been told enough times, they've been taught enough times that their voice is not a safe voice, right? So they try and pass it off as, I'm saying a backhanded compliment, or I'm trying to, like Amin said, I'm dipping my toe in the water to see how it's going to be received. And I think the most important thing that you have to do in those areas is, yes, give them exercise, but you have to give them multiple opportunities to feel safe, truly expressing how they communicate.
Okay.
Right. Amin and I talk about this all the time, in that we're both very direct communicators, right? And I've learned how to soften the blow at times in my career, because I used to be very aggressive in the way that I would communicate directly. But it's about understanding the people too that you're communicating with. Not everyone communicates the same. I was having this conversation with some leaders the other day. You have to take the time to get to know your people, and those that are passive aggressive, you have to figure out where the safe space is for them, and you have to allow them to express themselves, knowing that sometimes oftentimes in the very beginning, they're going to be really uncomfortable with that, because they've been taught so many times they can't be who they are. They can't really say what's on their mind. And there's a training piece that needs to go in that as well, of just because you want to say this, the way you say it is oftentimes as important, if not more important, than what you're really saying. Right. So if you come across, as you said, JJ, if you come across as a douchebag every time you express yourself, right, then no one's going to be receptive to that either. And you're going to retreat back to what you've known forever and be passive aggressive. All right. So there's a lot of depth to that.
Culture first, all shall follow. What is the quote? Culture beats strategy every time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Culture eats
having
strategy for
meditation
breakfast.
classes and knowing how to say the right thing, and having all that stuff, I think is all very, very peripheral. But if you haven't got the culture that makes this place I want to be, I'm never gonna be sharing my opinion. I'm never gonna be behaving nicely. So, in a corporate environment, or actually any environment, humans are a social species, and we function like ants or bees, and that's the best thing. Once you've got a good environment, you can then throw the Lego blocks, and you can teach people how to be more effective in speaking as a leader, etc. So yeah, culture
So,
first for me, please.
yeah, so can we take this a little back down to the earth and not so in the air? So let me give a scenario, unless, if you don't mind, I would love to hear your thoughts, because I run into these scenarios all the time, different forms, whatever, but I really love what's happening, how we handle it, what are some other things. So for in cultures that tend to be passive aggressive, there's one signal, at least the ones I work in, there's a couple signals. One, gossip is power. And so what happens is that, there's the meeting, then there's the meeting after the meeting or the meeting before the meeting, where the decisions are being made, but nobody wants to talk about it in the meeting. Then there's the conversations that people have in groups that pull themselves together because everybody wants to hear a good story, right? And that is the denigrating of the leaders, or it's the leaders, and it doesn't, I'm not saying it's workers versus leaders, it could be managers having this, and not really going to the CEO to say that they're aggressive, or they're constant changing of their mind, or you tell so-and-so this and you tell so-and-so that, is actually causing us to be in a passive aggressive situation, right? And then there's the third scenario that I run into, is that where a person is actually using these passive aggressive, I don't know, thinking about it, to gain power in the organization. And I'm not saying it's power of or anything else, but an audience, maybe let me say it that way, an audience that follows them. And therefore they come in with what I call, they clobber you with the they story. Well, I heard they aren't in line with your decision. I heard they don't like those kinds of things. So there's kind of three scenarios. How would we, what's happening from a neurological point of view? Because, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to just quit.
Denise, you described a work environment that I know very, very well. I mean, you couldn't have said the work environment any better than what you just said. And part of it goes back to what JJ was talking about. Culture is the most important piece. And we talked about this at the beginning. If culture doesn't start at the top, if the person who's really in charge doesn't live the culture, it's really hard to make progress. Right. And if that person who's at the top says they want honest feedback, but when they get the honest feedback, they don't accept it, or they push back against it, it's exactly what you're talking about. Right.
I've got a great question, he says so confidently. I have a question, Tanner.
Yeah.
I have a great question for you, because a restaurant's a great place to audit leadership. Either it's a good meal or it isn't. You can't fake it. Okay. Right. And because you're a chef, this is a great opportunity to speak about some of those incredibly arrogant TV chefs. I can't think of that guy's name, but there's some real horrible people out there that are famous chefs. But if you're in a restaurant, you never see that. All you care about is the product.
Right.
And
That's what you're paying for.
in your experience, how does a healthy environment improve the quality of the food? How does the chef influence the quality of the performance of the product, the lasagna or whatever? Can you see a direct link, or am I just missing the point a bit?
Absolutely, you can see a direct link. So it's culinary environments, especially very high functioning, very professional culinary environments like the ones that you're talking about. So I'll share two stories. One is Gordon Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay, everybody knows as being the foul mouth, scream at you chef. And I've known some people who've worked with Gordon, and he is not like that. A lot of that's for show, but Gordon's a very direct communicator, right? And one of his famous quotes is that chefs don't want, actually, I think it was attributed to Anthony Bourdain, chefs don't want free thinkers, right? I don't want you to go rogue and create the dish that I've spent my career perfecting and do little twists to it, do little tweaks to it, right? Because exactly what you're saying, JJ, is people come into Gordon Ramsay's flagship restaurant. They come in for his beef Wellington, right? That's one of the things that he is known for. He doesn't want some, cocky chef that's, trying to make a name for themselves to come in and make the beef Wellington in some different way, right? Whatever that little tweak is. So, there's a hierarchy and an understanding of you're going to do what I tell you to do, right? And if you can't do that, then you can't work with me, right? Now, on the completely other side of the spectrum, there's Thomas Keller. And Thomas Keller is, he's widely regarded as the best American chef. He has a restaurant called the French Laundry in Napa Valley. Just an incredible chef and restaurateur, and brilliant individual. He encourages creativity in his chefs, but it's under the understanding that when you make this dish, right, if it is perfect and we're putting it on the menu, it's not your dish, it's the restaurant's dish. And so one of the very famous stories about this is Grant Achatz. Grant Achatz he had the #1 restaurant in the world for a number of years called Alinea in Chicago. Very avant-garde, very creative, molecular gastronomy, like things don't look like what they really are types of dishes. Well, he went to French Laundry and was working with Thomas Keller, and he came up with this cantaloupe and caviar dish, and he presented it to Thomas. And Thomas said, this is incredible. Do you want to put it on the menu? I'd love to have it on the menu. Okay, but I need you to understand that once it goes on the menu, it's not a Grant Achatz dish. It's a French Laundry dish, right? So allowing them to be vulnerable and be creative, but with the understanding that this is for a greater purpose. And Grant Achatz then took that lesson when he opened up Alinea and it was blowing up. And he has an incredible sous chef that made this dish that was it's a green apple balloon. So literally it's a balloon that's filled with helium, but the whole outside of it, the balloon itself, is edible, and it's made completely out of green apple and some other food chemicals. And it's a showstopper. When you see this thing come out, you're like, oh, I can eat this. When that sous chef brought it to Grant Achatz and said, look at this cool thing that I have, I think it's going to be amazing. What do you think Grant Achatz's conversation with him was? This is awesome, but if we put it on the menu, this is now an Alinea dish. This is not yours, right? And he'll give credit, in multiple interviews, he's giving credit. Thomas Keller, multiple interviews, he's giving credit to Grant Achatz and what he's done. So I think there's room for vulnerability with a level of understanding of what the greater purpose is. Even with Gordon Ramsay and his beef Wellington, he's going to teach you how to make the best beef Wellington in the world. Right. But it will never deviate from what that original recipe is. And you have to be, and he's vulnerable in telling people that, but you also have to be vulnerable in receiving that, right? My creativity is not going to be what I want it to be while I am creating your dishes. Right. So two very different examples, but both I think speak to what you're asking, I hope.
I worked with a leader that
you've
for
covered
years
more
he
than
said, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please carry on, Denise. I'm curious. Please carry on.
Yeah, I work with a leader in manufacturing and chemicals, etc., multi-conglomerate, and his quote was, "Steal shamelessly, give credit liberally."
Wow.
That's what your story, Tanner, made me remember. He
Yeah,
was
I
very
love it.
big on that. That ideas are, that is it. But give credit to where the idea came from. You can own it, but and oftentimes, you take an idea from here, you take an idea from there, you do this, you come up with your own thing. But give credit that, we're standing on the shoulders of someone, of these people here. So he always said all the time, when people would come in, it was the days of companies coming in to do benchmarking. And we'd all get, oh, we don't want them taking our ideas. He said, no, 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 no. It's a back and forth thing. Steal shamelessly, give credit liberally.
I
I
love
think
that.
there's a difference in corporate size. I mean, if you're in a corporate and you give credit, you're not really like differentiating the product. You're kind of just building the the project management protocols, or you improving
No,
the
no, that's
process.
not true. That's not necessarily true. It is a lot that people think about. But when you work in companies and you're a technical expert, we give them a confidential and NDA document that says that whatever you create, we own. You have
Yeah.
to sign that over
Yes.
in corporations. So it's similar to, it's just not as well known. People think of corporations as project management, but every idea you come up with, the company owns that idea.
I mean, it depends on industry. I mean, if you're working for, an AI company and you invent a hack that improves the function of this product, it's highly unlikely they're going to let you take that new topic and go speak to a different AI company, or with Apple. With people who have specific intellectual property that influences the market, I very much doubt they'll let that person willy-nilly take that idea and go shopping for a new job.
No, it goes across. I mean, 3M, the whole idea of Post-it notes is the same thing. But 3M owns it, not the person who invented it. When I worked for a pharmaceutical company, the companies that or the products that the scientists came up with was owned by the company. When I worked for the gas company, tools and invention and tools and technology that an employee or employee group came up with was owned by them and then sold to other oil and gas companies. So it happens all the time. We just don't hear about it as much.
Is that fair, do you think, Denise? Is that fair? If you're working for a company and you invent the cool gadget, do you think it's fair for you to take that idea and run with it? Or do you think the company's been paying for you to think, and that product now belongs to the restaurant?
Yes, because the company gave you the opportunity to hone that idea, as well as paid for the time that you took to refine that idea and socialize that idea to the point of it. I think if you want to be an inventor, or you happen to have an idea and you want to take it and do something else with it, there are other ways that you can figure that out, but you can't do it on the company's dime.
So if you invent a new meal or a new recipe, Tanner, and
Mhm.
you're working at Bob's Bistro, will Bob be okay if you take that recipe and go work at Mary's Bistro?
That's a great question. So I worked for a contract food management company for a number of years. And when I signed the contract going to work with them, it was in the language of the contract, very, very much like what Denise is saying. It said that any recipes that I created while employed by them was their property. Now, I have a number of recipes that I've created on my own outside of working for a company. They're my recipes, and I'm more than happy to share them wherever I want. So, for example, I was just on the news a couple months ago sharing a crab cake recipe. That's my recipe. I've made that recipe for 20 years, right? And it doesn't belong to anyone else except for who I want to give it to. But everything that I made while I was working for that contract food management company, any recipe that I wrote, that's their recipe, right? Now, can I go and make tweaks to it because I created it and I know it, and you know, I mean, food's a little different than what Denise is talking about. Yeah, of course I can, right? But could that company come back to me and said, hey, that recipe mirrors the chicken marsala that you made for us, you need to take it off your menu? They would have the right to do that, you know. But food is one of those things where people have been cooking for you know, millennia and millennia and millennia and millennia.
It's time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, food is one of those super amazing, that's why I call it the universal language. It's one of those things where it's really hard to create something new, right? Something that has truly never been done before. Because again, we're pulling from a lot of different techniques and cultures and cuisines and ingredients and those types of things. Somebody has probably made something similar or had the idea before. I have a good friend who's a retired chemical engineer, and he worked in the chemical engineering business his entire career. Everything that he built, every product that he made while he was a chemical engineer belongs to the company that he made it for. None of it is his property, and he can tell you all the cool different stuff that he made that's in the marketplace now, but none of it's his.
Yeah. So I can tell you from my end, I've created a lot of tools, several assessments, but they're mine. I created on my dime. It's my branding on there. I'll allow people to use it, or I'll use it with organizations that I've worked with, but it's my stuff branded with my information, not with, and I would not allow the company to put their logo or their branding on there just because I want to control the intellectual property of it.
It's you know, so this conversation, getting back to the topic of vulnerability, is interesting in that different people will take it very differently. You know, so you know, if the ones I have the most difficulty with, where the ones I have the most difficulty with, or had the most difficulty with, were those individuals like you're texting, JJ. Isn't that selfish? And it depends on how you think about ideas and what your basis of ideas are, because you know their cultures. China's most noted for that ideas are not something that you can patent. You can't make money on ideas. And for years, you know, the biggest tension between the U.S. and China has been them taking ideas, monetizing it, and we have patents on it, and they're known for, you know, they just don't think ideas are ubiquitous. And so from that, you have to understand who you're bringing into your culture and what is their belief system set on. So if it's, you know, in a more capitalist oriented society, then they get the idea and they understand that, you know, intellectual property is intellectual property, physical property is physical property, and they have that idea. But if you're in a culture where that is not the basis of their belief, you know, many Native Americans don't believe in the idea of you can buy and sell property or land or anything. It's all a gift. Those are the clashes that cause a culture, a company culture, to have to deal with and become vulnerable about this is who we are. This is the mainstay and the floor of how we operate together. And if you don't believe that, then we have to have conversations about, is this the right place that you need to be?
Yeah, and I think it speaks. It goes back to what Tanner was saying with the two examples he showed with those famous chefs. Is that while you know, in being vulnerable, we're gonna allow you some leeway to do these things, but there's things that are non-negotiable, and these are it. And we have to agree on that. And to your point, Denise, if you make that clear up front, then there shouldn't be any further conversations about that, because you know that up front that these are the things that are non-negotiable for, for our culture and for who we are and what we do.
I think it's an acceptance point. I don't know
Mhm.
that my feelings won't get hurt, to JJ's point.
Yeah.
Of, his comment was very telling and very human. His comment is, isn't it selfish for me to want to own my IP when I'm in a team? Yes, I don't think it is selfish, but I do think it is human. That because what you create, if you think about the process of creating something, it comes from the heart. It comes from your labor. It is an extension of your identification. And therefore, we do want to have some tie to it, which is the other side of steal shamelessly, give credit liberally.
Yes.
We can't accept the idea of someone taking our idea if it is like an adoption, and then suddenly, you don't know where your child went, you don't know what happened to your child, etc. So I think you have to be really clear, and when you're talking about these ideas of what is owned and what is not owned, and who is in the culture and what ideas they might have in there. And vulnerability to me means, or the power of vulnerability means, that we have these conversations in the open and not have these conversations in a gossipy or chandeliering or covenant way, in which the power is being, the power of the feeling, the desire, the humanity in us is not twisted in a way that creates more power for you on a negative scale. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to recognize that just because you may not own the property at the company doesn't mean that you can't speak to the idea that it was something that you created. Mm-hmm. Right. And that can also open up doors in the future. Right. So I had a friend, actually, when I worked at that contract food management company, he was the director of procurement, and he worked for research and development for Wendy's for a number of years. And I said, of all the things that you built at Wendy's, what is the thing that you're the most proud of? And he said, Tanner, I made the grilled chicken sandwich. Like, that product that's on their menu, that was mine. Right. He can't take that anywhere. But imagine the doors that opens. Right. I'm responsible for that thing. It's not mine. It's Wendy's. But that's what I did.
And, right? In the corporate world, we understand that. So if somebody came to me and said, that's the product I created, there's this non-negotiable discussion, because we know that happens all the time. Yeah.
Thanks, JJ.
Guys, I need to run. I have to go to Wendy's. I'm starving. I'm just kidding, but this has been awesome. I mean, keep up the good work. Tanner, you've been missed, so please come back to the Beehive. And Denise, your insight is awesome. I gotta love you and leave you guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, all right, JJ.
Hey, enjoy your Saturday or Sunday.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
A great conversation. Oh man, this has been amazing. I don't want to take too much longer, and we can do a second part to this, but let's finish it off in talking about the strategies for cultivating vulnerability. And I know we've mentioned psychological safety, so maybe we touch upon that, self-awareness, and whoever wants to go first, and we'll touch on those two to end this.
So I'm not going to touch on either one of those, because really what I want to say is Denise brought up 3 really great scenarios earlier that are critical to addressing to create a culture of vulnerability.
Okay.
Right. And I think that the sooner you can recognize those, and the detriment that they have to the process of vulnerability and the team's ability to express themselves, I think those are some of the most important things. Because Denise, I think he nailed it right on the head with all 3 of those examples. And like I said, those are real tangible examples that I mean, you explained some environments that I know very, very well. And so it's getting constructive and creative in how do you address it, right? How do you stop the gossiping, right? How do you stop the they conversations? Well, who said?
Yeah,
right?
who's they?
Who's they? right? Because this conversation holds no weight to me whatsoever if we can't get them in the room with us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that we can really have these conversations, right? The before meetings or after meetings. If you're making decisions about how it's going to go, why are we even having the meeting?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just send a memo.
Why just send the memo? It could have been an email, right? Could this meeting
Yep.
have been an email?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that, you know, when we talk about building a culture of vulnerability, I mean, it's recognizing what are the enemies of vulnerability that are in the environment
Yes.
that you're in.
Yes.
You know,
I love that.
Yeah, and how do you slay those enemies, or how do you bring those enemies to light? You know,
I'm following up on what you said, Tanner, and thank you for taking us on the curve. So I said let's go right or left. Tanner said no, we're making a U-turn. I love it. I love it. So yes, I'm what Tanner is saying. I double down on that because I've experienced those same type of environments, and it's hard for that type of behavior to change unless you can get the person in charge, whoever that person is, uh, to change their own behavior so that, in a sense, the team can change their reactions to the person's in charge behavior. Because if the person in charge is the one creating those I would say the animosity or whatever that is that happens, if the person in charge is the one making decisions prior to the meeting and then just kind of playing a song and dance and then saying this is what we're doing, then what's the point? If the
right,
person, if the person in charge is not living to the culture that person stating, this is our culture, but I'm not going to live to the culture, then how do you change that? You can't. That person has to be able to have the self-awareness moment and working with either a coach or a confidant that's going to help them come to the realization, hey, the problem is me. I have to start with me before anything else changes in the organization.
Well, I agree with you 75%. Because a leader who does not have the psychological safety to be able to step up and call out these behaviors needs to find a way in which they can learn the skills to be able to do that. So I agree with that much of it, but I've also seen where this is truly a power dynamic going on, and the scenario often happens with the majority minority. So whoever that is, if it's it's a male environment and a woman comes into it, and that's kind of the one I was thinking about.
Okay.
The woman is kind of cutting through.
Mhm.
Hey, we don't need to have meetings before the meetings. We don't need to do this, da, 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 da. And they're getting the backlash
Yes.
from both their boss, who wants to maintain the culture because they get something out of it, but
Okay.
also believability.
Mm-hmm.
So the other side of it is well, I don't believe that's happening. Joe wouldn't have the meeting before you to get in the meeting and then circumvent what you're talking about. That just doesn't happen, kind of thing. And so it's not as cut and dried.
Okay.
Sometimes, or in fact, the one that you're talking about, the 75% or 80% of the time you're talking about, those are easy to deal with. Somebody just has the wherewithal, the psychological safety, the trust to be able to say, hey, no, we're not going to act like this. We're going to act like this, and then enforce that and keep repeating that in the organization. But the ones that tend to be the kind of the water that just erodes the foundation of a culture are the things that happen outside of what a leader can see. And this idea of, I don't believe you because I've not experienced that. And so if you're not having those conversations with the leader, that just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. This is how this person experienced it. Therefore, you have to figure out a strategy or a behavior that's going to deal with that. Then it's hard. I've got, as we talked about yesterday, I've got a employee who has made a decision. They don't like what the CEO is doing. It is actively building a audience and a following to go to the board, and the board is open to letting, employees come to them. So it's not as cut and dried all the time. 25% of the time, it's not as cut and dried as the leader standing up and saying, hey, this is how the culture is going to be, and this is it. There can be so many facets to doing it, and you have to unearth that kind of water that's eroding the foundation of your culture.
I love what you said. Yes, when you have and I like to what I've heard from other people is, the underground world, or those not titled leaders. When you have an organization and you have a certain culture, or you're trying to put a culture together, you have to really get to know your people and figure out who are the biggest voices that are not titled leaders, that are going to help you drive your message the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So a leader has to be savvy enough to build those right relationships with those people that are going to, when he's not or she's not there, be able to uphold the standards, the values, the culture in those rooms when there's no leader or leadership in sight. That's where you get complete buy-in, and those murky waters usually go away when there's self-policing within the frontline people. But you have to have the buy-ins, the relationships with those people, where they are going to do some self-policing.
Absolutely. And I think you also have to find the other ones that are your divisive ones, that are your detractors, the ones that are drilling holes in your boat. And you have to figure out what makes them unhappy, right?
Yeah.
Like why are they feeling the way that they do? And how do you, again, who are your enemies to vulnerability?
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question, Denise?
No,
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't. That was a yes or no answer, and that if it wasn't immediately yes, then it's a no.
I'll say this. I think it is simple. It is easy to accept it as an intellectual idea. It is, I'm not sure it is the practicality of being able to do it. We've learned how to make it a practice, that we can teach people how to do it, because we set ideas. The work that I try to figure out how to do is to first unearth the concreteness of your ideas. I believe this is it. This is the way it's supposed to be. This, I know Joe, I know Mary, I know, Amin, all of that. And so to begin to loosen that, a person, and that they wouldn't do this, or that that's not who you think they are, and then deal with the fact that for years you might have believed that this person was like this, and now you have to shift who that person is, and then go through the ramifications of, well, who am I? Can I pick, what does that mean for me? Is a very complex coaching scenario. And so, yes, I agree with the intellectual conversation and the intellectual nature of what you offered as a solution out of it. And so that's probably yes. But I want us to recognize the dynamics, the fire-breathing dragons are not that, they're not that easy to tame. And, leaders want solutions now. They don't have time to be messing with these murky waters. And the last thing a leader really wants is for you to come in and shake their self-identity.
Yeah. I can tell you, 'cause I recently went through something similar. When you think you know someone, right? So we're like, hey, I know that person. But then you start hearing rumblings and you're like, I don't know, because I don't think that's that person. And it's to your point, it's like until I see it, I won't believe it. But I think that responsible thing for us to do as leaders is that when we hear the rumblings, we need to verify ourselves. We cannot just take our feelings at face value, saying, "I know that person," so that's not true. If you go ahead, Tan.
And I think there's a deep understanding that people change.
Yeah.
Right. People change. And, we lead a lot of organizational development projects and orientations and things like that. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is there's a lot of life that happens outside of these four walls, right? The life that happens inside these four walls is usually pretty regimented, right? We know what to expect in our days, but the stuff that happens outside these four walls, it has a massive impact on how we show up. So if somebody, you can know somebody for a long time. I know a similar example to what Amin's talking about. Know someone for a long, long time. All of a sudden they've changed, right? Well, why? And how is that now affecting them in the ways that they show up?
Mm-hmm.
And I agree, Denise. I think Dr. Amin's intellectual answer was very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
But the human answer is much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, it's fun to be here to talk about these concepts, and to share and know that, you're not the only one in these waters. Right.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's the value of that's the value of, as JJ was saying, that's the value of being here. Thought leaders testing ideas with other thought leaders, hanging out with other thought leaders who can help you, see the tentacles that make it very difficult to pull off what it is that the leader says that they want.
Yeah.
Great words. Any last words from everyone? We'll have to end the recording here, but we can continue on the future episodes. Tanner or Denise, anything you guys want to close with?
Thank you all for the time, and this was real.
It is.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for the time. This was a really great conversation.
All right. Tune in next month. We are heading towards empathy. We're grateful for you to be listening and watching. Have a great week wherever you may be.
Thank you. Have a blessed day.
Yep.